All right, we are going to get started for tonight. Want to welcome everybody back that's joined us on Zoom and on Facebook for our fourth session, which is over the church treasurer position within the church. We have Brother Chuck Porter here with us tonight from Victory Missionary Baptist Church down around Hendersonville. We definitely appreciate him being willing to come and give this lesson. He has both experience as well as personal experience with finances and things of that nature. Looking through his PowerPoint, I'm excited to see and to hear him talk about everything. I think will be very beneficial for many of us, even those that are already serving in treasurer positions. But we, as always, want to go to the Lord in prayer before we begin any of our sessions. And Brother Porter, we talked, I'll lead us in a word of prayer tonight, and just ask that everyone else be prayerful for him as he goes into this lesson as well. Lord, we want to thank you for just being here one more time. We're thankful for the session so far, for those that have been willing to devote and give their time to just put out your word, Lord, to teach us about the positions of the church, to teach us about the ways that we can grow into those positions. Just thankful, Lord, for each and every one that's joined, that's shared, that's helped put that word out. Pray, Lord, most of all, that you watch over the lost, Lord, that's within our churches, that you would take us and use us in somewhat a way, Lord, we may just let that light shine to the lost and dying world. Just ask you to watch over the churches that are represented here. Lord, pray that you bless them. Pray that you be in the many revivals that'll be coming up in the next few months. Lord, just pray that you be with each and every one that's bringing those messages and that might be taking part. Just thankful, Lord, as always, for our salvation this evening. Thankful for the many blessings that you bestowed upon us. Just ask that you be with us each and every day that we have time remaining. In your son's name we do pray, and for his sake, amen.
Amen.
Well, we want to once again just welcome Brother Chuck Porter, and we're going to turn it over to him. As always, if you have questions throughout, we'll be watching both in Zoom as well as on Facebook. You can message, you can post in the comments. We'll be watching all in between. Those that are in Zoom, as always, if you would please just remain muted until we get to the question answer part. For those who are watching on Facebook, if you've not joined on Zoom so far, after some of the things of last week, we're going to cut off Zoom entrances once we start the session, just to be extra safe. But more than welcome to join us on Facebook, and feel free to share and those types of things. But this time we'll turn it over to Brother Porter.
Good evening, and thank you, Brother Jeremy, for the opportunity to speak a little bit about the church treasury. As you mentioned, I'm a member of Victory Missionary Baptist Church here in Hendersonville, and I've been their assistant treasurer for approximately 13 years. And just want to give you a little bit of background on myself. So you might be thinking, well, why am I going to listen to this guy? But I got a little bit of experience in that area, so I just want to share that with you. I'm a 1988 graduate of Belmont University here in Nashville. I got a bachelor's of business administration degree with an accounting major. I became a certified public accountant in 1990. I have over 6 years experience in public accounting, over 5 years as a corporate accounting manager for a restaurant chain. And that chain happens to be Logan's Roadhouse Restaurants. And I left there in 2000 and ventured out into a new career, and I became a financial advisor. And currently I'm an independent financial advisor, self-employed. And I have also earned a personal financial specialist designation from the AICPA. I struggled with this slide. This is the purpose or mission of the treasurer of the Treasury Department of the church. And here's what I came up with. I said, the purpose of the church treasurer is to accurately account for all gifts, offerings, expenses, and safeguarding financial assets of the church, to be good stewards of financial resources which God has entrusted to the church in order to further the cause of Christ. So I hope as we go through the next slides in the next few minutes that we'll support this statement. All of it will come back into this purpose or mission statement that I tried to come up with. And as we go through here, I am a lot better at numbers than I am at grammar and spelling. So if you see something that doesn't quite look right, I apologize. So the first slide we're going to talk about is the qualifications of the treasurer. The treasurer should possess basic bookkeeping knowledge and banking skills, including being able to write checks, reconcile bank accounts, and utilize an accounting system to accurately record offerings and disbursements. Depending on the size of the church, an accounting system may be as simple as a handwritten ledger, or it could be an Excel worksheet. For larger churches, they may want to use accounting software like QuickBooks. Also, the accounting method used will also depend on the skill level of the person performing the job. Somehow or another, I've avoided having to learn QuickBooks. I use Excel worksheets to do capture the data and do our treasury report for our church, from our home church. So we're using Excel, but there's nothing wrong if you want to use something like QuickBooks, or if you're really small, the handwritten ledger works just as well. Qualifications of the church treasurer continued. In our church, per the bylaws, the treasurer must be a deacon. This may not be feasible in all churches, especially smaller churches. It is much more important for the treasurer to have basic financial understanding and skills, even if they're not a deacon. I'm going to tell you a story. When I became the assistant treasurer at Victory, we had a gentleman who was our treasurer. He was a deacon. He's a good man, honest man. He paid our bills on time. He kept a manual ledger. He would stand up in our business meetings and tell us what our collections were for the month, what our expenses were for the month, and what the net cash left at the end of the month was. When I became assistant treasurer, one thing is, I'm an old auditor, CPA, hence I asked to see the bank reconciliations, and he never provided them to me. Unfortunately, he didn't have the skills to reconcile the bank accounts. So for 10 to 12 years, our bank account did not get reconciled to the ledger and the report he was giving in business conference meeting. Needless to say, there was quite a discrepancy between what the balance he was reporting and what was actually in the bank. It took me a little while to get that reconciled and get it straightened out. But my point here is, make sure you've got somebody that has the skills to be the treasurer and can reconcile the bank accounts and understands basic bookkeeping in their job. When possible, have an assistant treasurer, and you can segregate the financial duties. The treasurer, for instance, may control the checkbook, writing checks, and so forth. The assistant treasurer could reconcile the bank account. So that way you've got two sets of eyes looking at the same data, and it will help minimize errors and omissions when reviewing the financial information. It's just called segregation of duties, and it's helpful if you got more than one person handling the financial information. We'll look at duties of the treasurer and assistant treasurer. I've got 8 different duties here, and what we're gonna, each section after this is labeled, or it's going to be for the 1 through 8 here. So the first thing is handling and accounting and securing offerings. That's the first job, the first duty. The second duty would be depositing the funds in a timely manner. I'll go back to my previous story. The treasurer was taking our deposits home, putting them in his personal safe at his house, but he may not count that money or deposit it for 2 to 3 weeks. And that's just unacceptable. You can't wait 2 to 3 weeks to deposit the church's money into the bank account. So there's too much stuff that can happen. It could be a robbery, fire, lose it, whatever. So we want to make sure that the depositing funds in the bank is done in a timely manner. Number 3, we want to paying expenses of the church accurately and in a timely manner. If you have employees, we're going to talk about paying those employees. You need to accurately record all collections and disbursements, prepare the treasury report to be presented in business conference meeting, and prepare and or be the leader in preparing the annual budget. And finally, prepare and file applicable tax forms and tax statements. So the first area we're going to go to is we're going to talk about collection of offerings. All funds should pass through the church treasurer system, treasurer's control. Offerings should be counted twice in the presence of two authorized individuals in a secure location in the church. I like, usually Brother Ricky and I, we count the offerings every Sunday morning. I like to use the same person. Brother Ricky's worked in retail a little bit at a tractor dealership, and he ran the counter up there. So he was very good at counting money. So he and I count the money, and we count it twice, and then before we make the deposit out. It's important that you try to count that money in a secure location in the church if possible. There was an office right off our vestibule to the right. And one Sunday morning, after we had collected our Sunday school offerings, we got robbed. A gentleman came in, went through the drawer and found our money, and he took off. Luckily, Brother DeRossett, a pretty big guy and played football, and he was pretty fast, chased him down, tackled him in our fellowship hall's front yard, and held him there till we got the police, and of course we got our money back. So it is important to put it in a secure location. Now we count our money in an office back off where the Sunday schools are in the back of the church, and where it's pretty secure. Members should not be allowed to cash checks from the church offering. And I'll tell you a story that I heard when I was in continuing education one time. This has nothing, I don't think it wasn't in our church, but I'll tell you the story just to prove my point. There was a gentleman, every Sunday, he would put $100 check in the offering plate. And then he would tell the usher, oh, well, I need $50 back out for my kids' lunch this week. So if you see the picture here, what he was doing was putting $100 in the plate, getting $50 back out. So at the end of the year, he looks like he made over $5,000 contribution to the church, when in actuality, he only made $2,500, but he was deducting the $5,000 tax return. I don't remember the story how he got busted, but I can't remember if somebody got mad at him and told on him, or if actually an IRS agent attended the church and saw what he was doing. But do not let people use the church offering plate as a check catching service. That was going on a little bit at our church when I became assistant treasurer, and I put an end to it. We just don't cash checks at the church. They need to go to their bank to get their checks cashed. We need to record the offering amount in the ledger before the funds leave the church. We use a 4-column little book register. We list down the date, description, and the description could be just our regular Sunday morning offering, could be our building fund offering, could be for us singers if we have a singing, or it could be benevolence or vacation Bible school. So we write down the description and we put how much coin, cash, checks, and then a total that we collected. And then what I do at the end of the month, I take a print, I make a copy of that page for that month, and I check it against our deposits in the bank. So that's sort of a control to write that down before the cash leaves the church. It's just a good control. Deposits should be made promptly, usually the same day. We do ours the same day. Brother Ricky and I'll count it. I'll make out the deposit slip. It goes into a plastic disposable deposit bag that seals up. And I've got a key to the night deposit box at the church or at the bank. And I go after church most every Sunday and deposit that offering into the bank's night safety deposit box. Doesn't hurt if you vary the times that you go. Just if somebody happens to see you do it 2 or 3 times in a row at the same time every day, then you might be a little bit vulnerable depending on where you live and what your situation is as far as the city goes. Some churches, I think, probably make their deposit on Monday. They come in and they do a recording of all their checks, who paid, what the contributions were by person, and by check, and then they do a summary at the end of the year for that person if they want it. So some people do it Monday. We do ours usually on Sunday, and but definitely you want to get the deposit in there just to be safe as soon as possible. Let's talk about disbursement of offerings or funds. The treasurer is in charge of disbursement of funds at the direction of the church. All checks written should be supported by proper billing statements and receipts. Utilize a check request form to reimburse church members for items purchased for the church. A check request form should note on there who to make the check payable to, description of the items purchased, and which budget or line item expense category to charge, and a receipt should be attached. Accounting of all expenses or other disbursements should be given in the treasury report every month. At our church, checks written over $5,000 must have 2 signatures, and there should never be any cash disbursements made from the church. This is a sample of a check request form, very similar to what we use in our church. Who would use one of these? I'll give you an example. Brother Doug, our treasurer, he used to be a regional manager for Kohl's department stores. And so he could get a deal on a vacuum. And so when our vacuums go out, he goes to Kohl's, gets a discount, uses his discount and gets our vacuums for us. And so he pays for them, but he obviously wants to get reimbursed for buying the vacuums. So he would fill out one of these forms and he would put the amount in there, make payable to himself, return the check to him, put it in the description. He'd put vacuums for the church. It would be a repairs and maintenance item. And he would put his name as requested by. Well, he doesn't want to sign a check that's made out to him. So he'll put this in the tray and he usually sends me a text, says, hey, I got a reimbursement form. I need for you to issue a check on it. So I'll go in, I'll put the check number in there. I'll put my name as issued by, and he'll have a receipt. And then I just return the check to him when we do that. Same thing with my wife. She's in charge of the decorating of the church during Christmas, Easter, etc. She'll go out and buy flowers to decorate the church with, for example. So she will do, and she pays for it. And then she wants to get reimbursed for it. So she does this check request reimbursement form and attaches a receipt to it. The reason this is important, if you ever get audited or if your church wants to do an audit, then you can support what happened or where the expense came from, who it got paid to, and there shouldn't be any issues. Not all church may have employees. Let's talk about salaried employees of the church. And the reason this came up in our church, we were giving out a lot of 1099s to what we considered contract employees. And some of those people were working for the pastor. One of them is the pastor's assistant, and we have a couple of people cleaning the church. Well, according to the IRS regulations, that really wasn't the correct way to do that. So employees of the church typically are going to include your pastor and can include other people either paid salary or by the hour. For example, an assistant pastor or people that clean the church. So a pastor's salary is subject to self-employment taxes. For example, a pastor would receive a W-2 at the end of the year with no taxes withheld, and the W-2 reports wages only net of a housing allowance. And we're going to talk about the housing allowance here in the next slide. But the pastors, their wages are a little bit different than everybody else. They're not going to have FICA and Medicare tax and withholding on their W-2. Now, our cleaning personnel does get a W-2 with withholding and FICA. The church has to match the FICA, and the assistant to the pastor, which is vacant right now, also would get a W-2 with taxes withheld. But pastors are different, and it's because of their housing allowance that's available. If you're going to do salaried employees and you're going to pay them, I would recommend you use a payroll service. And the reason being, tax forms and money needs to be filed electronically with the IRS and the US Treasury. And it just makes it so much easier if you use a payroll processing company. We use Dominion Payroll Services at our church. Talk about a minister who receives housing allowance. They can exclude the allowance from gross income to the extent it's used to pay expenses in providing a home. Generally, those expenses include rent, mortgage interest, utilities, and other expenses directly related to providing a home. The amount excluded can't be more than a reasonable compensation for the minister's services. A minister's housing allowance is excluded from gross income for income tax purposes, but not for self-employment taxes. So he's still going to have to pay on the housing allowance. He's still going to have to pay the FICA tax or the self-employment tax, which is the equivalent when he files his tax return. A minister can set the housing allowance, the amount that he estimates that the housing is going to cost him, and the church needs to designate those funds as a housing allowance. A motion in business conference meeting just stating that Pastor Tim is going to get $20,000 or whatever it is for housing allowance. It just needs to be in the minutes because the church technically is supposed to designate those funds as housing allowance. If the pastor wants to make a change at the beginning of the year, typically they can do that at the beginning of the year. Recording for the collections received and disbursements made. A process needs to be established to record in detail the offerings and disbursements. Again, disbursements. Again, this may be as simple as a manual ledger in a small church, an Excel spreadsheet, or an accounting software like QuickBooks. The method also depends on the size of the church, volume of transactions, and the skill level of the treasurer or assistant treasurer. Offerings and gifts should be segregated by type. For example, church offerings, benevolence offerings and gifts, love offerings for seniors, etc., should be segregated by type. Although benevolence and love offerings are pass-through funds, a record should be kept of the funds received and subsequent disbursement. So if you have in our church from time to time, somebody will bring in a check, say $4,000, and say, I'd like for this to go to this family. They feel like they're in need or need some help financially. We deposit that in the church. We record it in our deposit ledger or cash ledger when we make the deposit. And then we write a check to that family. And a lot of times the church member wants it to be anonymous, and it will stay anonymous, but we'll just write a check to that family for that $1,000. So there's a record of the money being received, money being dispersed. And so there shouldn't be any questions there when the time comes if it ever got reviewed or audited. We're going to recording for collections received and disbursements made continued. Expenses should be categorized by expense type. For example, utilities, insurance, flower expense, food expense, pastor's wages. The business check stub is a good place to record the detail about the disbursement. If not available, a separate check register or ledger can be utilized. Record the date, check number, amount, payee, and comment regarding the disbursement. What we do, we've got the business checks. It's got the blue stub on the left-hand side. We put the date, who it's payable to, and what it was for. And at the end of each month, I can take those and I can do my books with those check stubs for the checks that we've written. At least monthly, a bank reconciliation should be performed and any differences investigated and reconciled. If possible, this should be performed by someone other than the person writing checks. This will segregate duties and will help identify mistakes and errors in recording the receipts of the disbursements. If you're a small church and maybe you only have one person that's writing the checks and doing the bank reconciliations, maybe you want to once a year just have a couple of the members form a little audit committee and just review the bank reconciliations and the books and records that's been kept through the year. You can meet on a Saturday morning, for a couple hours and just go over it and review it and take some sample receipts and make sure everything looks legit when you're as they're recording all that stuff throughout the year.
Brother Porter, we had
Yes,
a
sir.
question that was relevant to something you just said, so I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and put it in there. It was talking about the housing alliances. Says, do we need to make a motion to designate those as housing allowance each year?
Wouldn't be a bad idea. I know we don't do that. It wouldn't hurt if you did designate that. Typically, I try to ask Brother Tim at the beginning of the year, does he want to change his housing allowance? Typically, in the last few years, he hasn't changed it. So I'll be honest with you, I forgot to ask him. But it wouldn't hurt to do that as a motion, but I don't know that we don't do it every year. But it's somewhere along the way, if it changed, then I think we probably should do another motion.
You're good to go ahead. I just wanted to cover that one while we were on it. So
Sure. A treasury report should be prepared and presented in the business meeting, typically monthly. For most churches, the cash basis of reporting offerings and disbursements is adequate. Large churches may want to use accrual accounting method and present a balance sheet with an income statement. Accounting software is recommended if you're going to do the accrual basis of accounting. A balance sheet lists all the assets, including buildings, furniture, equipment, etc., with related depreciation of the assets. The balance sheet would consist of prepaid assets and accrued expenses. For example, when we pay our liability insurance for the church buildings and everything, let's say it's going to be $12,000. It's not that much. I'm going to make easy math. Then if you're doing the accrual method of accounting, you would put that $12,000 on your balance sheet. Then every month you would charge off $1,000 of it. So you're sort of matching. Accrual accounting matches the benefit with the expense better than a cash basis. But for most of us, I know at our church we just use the cash basis. It's adequate to chart, to track your cash in, cash out, and where you're spending the money. If a budget's prepared, the treasury report should list actual offerings and expenses as compared to the budget for the month and the year to date. Comparing actual offerings and expenses versus budget offerings and expenses allows the church to monitor the financial situation against financial plan, the actual financial situation against financial plan. The benefit allows the church to make adjustments, hopefully avoiding financial stresses. What I did is, this is, I hope you can see it. I know the print's came out a little bit small. I just took a hypothetical treasury report. This is the one we use at Victory. I've changed all the numbers to protect the innocent. So the pastor's salary, expenses, and insurance, they're not real. You can call Brother Tim and ask him if you want to know all that. So anyway, what we do is we have all these expense categories. Our regular Sunday offerings and building fund offerings are once a month. We do have the pastor's salary and so forth and so on. And we do the actual for the month. We do the budget that we planned on spending for that month. And then we have year to date. I be a little more careful than me. I've got June 30th, 2022 at the top, and I got 2023 at the top of the columns. But like I said, this is a hypothetical example just to show you how the layout of a treasury report would be. And this is what we use at our church. And the key to this when you're reading it is year to date. I mean, you can be off a month, a little bit off every month here, give or take, especially in utilities, but you want to look at the year to date and see how you're trending. Some people add a couple of columns and do a variance in there. That got a little hectic and got a little busy, so we took that out several years ago. I want to put that out there. Oh, and our actual cash balance, there's another page of this I didn't put out there. I can, if anybody wants to email me, I'll show you what it looks like. But it shows our beginning cash, cash added, which is the net revenue. In this case, it's $4,919. And then we have ending cash. And then we break that down by general fund, building fund, and then we do have a youth fund. That youth fund is designed just for our youth directors to pay for things that the youth want to do. We think it's important for our youth to get together, have fun, build relationships outside of church as well. For example, we take them bowling on President's Day weekend because they don't have to go to school on Monday. So Sunday after church, we order pizza and we go pay for bowling, and we charge that against our youth fund. So that's what that's for. And then our second sheet also has our mission support listed out by who gets what amount. So let's talk about budgeting here for a minute. Almost all churches can benefit from a budget. Actually, all businesses and even personal individuals can benefit from a budget. So that's my other job. But what a budget is, it represents in numbers what is anticipated financially happen over the next year. What we're going to anticipate in offerings, what are we going to anticipate in expenses by line item. The budget allows the treasurer and church to monitor actual financial numbers against plan. If the plan is not being met, then adjustments can be made. Financial stress occurs. When creating a budget, depending on the size of the church, a budget committee should be formed. The committee should consist of the treasurer, maybe the assistant treasurer, one or two deacons, and the person in charge of facilities maintenance, and probably your pastor. And let me say this, when we get down to doing our budget and we're talking about the pastor's salary, we ask him to leave. So that's how we handle that. And if he's going to be sitting in the budget meeting with us. If you get a few people in there, especially the facilities maintenance, the more input you get, the better your budget's going to be. It's just the bottom line. So get as much input as you can. Don't get too many. We have like 5 people on we have 4 or 5 people on our budget committee. It works pretty well. Once the budget is completed, you present it to the church. We do ours in December conference meeting, and then for approval or adoption in that meeting. And once the budget is approved or adopted, it cannot be changed. It will be, you're just going to be over under budget. So let's say you got your budget approved in December, January comes along and somebody says, well, I'd like to give this missionary or mission $200 a month. Well, you don't go back and change your budget. Your budget's in concrete, but you go ahead and pay the $200 a month to the missionary that you wanted to pay. You're just going to be over budget $200 a month. So unless you monitor, as long as you know what's happening there and your church can afford it, it's no big deal, but you'll just be over. You can't go back and change the budget. I'm a stickler on this next point. Budgeting continuing. A balanced budget must be created and presented. Balanced budget means planned expenses cannot exceed planned collections. Somebody needs to tell our federal government this, I think. We've had budgets where we've had only a surplus of $5 when we got to the end of the year, and then other times we've had $5,000 to $10,000 in our budget, but it needs to be balanced. You can't present a budget where you're losing money. You got to go back and work that budget, get that financial plan in order so that you've got a good plan to follow and monitor through the year. Just to note, a budget is a guide. It does not dictate actual spending or limits on some spending categories. For example, mission support. I'll have people come up to me after we put the budget in, they didn't understand they thought the budget numbers were in concrete and we couldn't vary from them. That's really not what the budget is. It's just a plan. And sometimes you're going to go over, and sometimes you won't go over, and hopefully it all balances out at the end. All right, let's talk about taxes and tax forms for a minute. Most churches are nonprofit organizations and do not file federal income tax returns, but some tax returns and forms need to be filed. If you have a contractor or a contract non-employee is paid more than $600 in a year, a Form 1099 NE should be sent to them and a related Form 1096 filed with the IRS. Information needs to be collected from the non-contract employee. And I don't know what happened to my slide here. Got a little bit off here. But what we use in our church, I use a Form W-9. For instance, when our revival helper comes in, I will ask him to fill out a W-9. It gets his name, address, and social security number. And that way I can send him a 1099 at the end of the year. So it's a good tool. You can go out to the irs.gov and just search for Form W-9, and it will give you, you can print it off in the PDF format. Other examples who may get a 1099, maybe lawn services, painting, repair people, visiting preachers if you pay them over $600. But typically corporations, LLCs, you don't have to send them a 1099. So if you have a ServPro come in, they clean your church carpets, you do not have to send them a 1099. This is really for individuals that the government's trying to track that are getting paid and make sure they record their revenue that we're paying them. So that's the reason, the purpose for the 1099s. There are several online services to assist in filing 1099s. The one I use is called Tax Bandits. It will retain the information from previous years if you're paying the same person over and over. But I would recommend, there's several out there, you can just Google it, but Tax Bandits is just one that I use when I do my 1099s. I feel like it's important for us to comply with some of these tax forms and tax returns as much as we can. My personal opinion is I think the government and Christians are going to start getting targeted more and more. And the fewer loopholes I can see them, the fewer loopholes I can close up, I think the better off we are. So that's the reason I think this is important, and we need to make sure we try to comply with this as much as possible. All right, let's talk about other tax forms and related tax topics. In Tennessee, most nonprofit organizations, including churches, are exempt from paying our sales tax. What we get is a sales tax exemption certificate from the state, and we can present it to vendors of the church, and we won't have to pay sales tax on our purchases. For example, we don't pay sales tax on cleaning supplies, fellowship hall supplies, etc. We actually have some accounts set up. We have a Sam's Club card, and they have attached our sales tax exemption certificate to our Sam's Club card. It's a lot of saying right there, a lot to say. And so what happens when we go swipe our card at Sam's Club, it knows not to charge us sales tax. And we also have a Lowe's card and a Home Depot card for our building maintenance people if they want to go over there and they need to buy something to fix plumbing. We don't get charged sales tax on those plumbing supplies. Just some other tax topics. A lot of people don't have to itemize their deductions anymore because the standard deduction's gone so high. I think it's around 27,000 now with being indexed. But church members still may need a statement from the church stating their contributions that they have made. So the way you should do this is if available, use your letterhead. If your church doesn't have letterhead, you can create that in Microsoft Word. Just put the church name, address, and then you can put the member's name on there and show their contributions. This is where it goes back to You won't make the deposit on Monday, so somebody come in on Monday morning and write down all the checks, all the church people that gave a check. Or in our case, it's a little more difficult in some ways, but maybe not quite as time consuming. We download the information from the church from our deposits, and then we can identify through copies of the checks that they provide online who made a contribution. We're probably down to just one or two people needing a statement now, but just want to make sure you realize that if somebody's going to fill out their 1040, their personal tax return, and they made a contribution to the church, and they're going to make that deduction on their 1040 individual income tax return, they do need a receipt for those contributions in addition to their canceled check. So I just want to put that out there, and that's what these statements are for. I have no clue how we're doing on time. Hope I didn't bore everybody too much. Hopefully you got some coffee or tea before we started. But I am Brother Jeremy. I'm ready for questions. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. I check my personal email a couple times a day. If it's something a little more urgent, use the business email. I check it. It pops up throughout the day. And if you can't remember my contact information, my website's there. If you don't mind, put Church Treasury in the subject field. We all get a lot of emails, and sometimes I might accidentally overlook it. But if you put Church Treasury in there, I'll try to respond. And if I don't respond, text or call me at the number on the screen.
I
guess we're ready for questions, or yeah. I think that's my spiel.
You're good. We got a few questions, and for those that are joined in either location, feel free to add those in the comments if we have others as we're going through these. So the first one we got was, and I'm assuming they're meaning if there's an assistant and a treasurer, that they're both gone, but if the treasurer misses church, who should handle the collection?
In our case, I handle the collection almost every Sunday as the assistant treasurer. And then Brother Ricky is just a member of our church who helps me count it. We require that the church deposits be recorded be counted by two people. And so what we do is Brother Ricky and I count the deposit twice. He counts the cash. I do the checks twice. Then I count the cash again. I make out the deposit slip, put it in the deposit bag, and then I take it to the bank. If I'm not there, Brother Doug, the treasurer, can step in and take care of that.
Always good to have a backup to the backup. So let's see. What do you do if someone puts a check in the offering that everything is filled out except for the to line?
Made payable to line?
Correct. So in other words, they had filled it out. Again, if I don't get this right, somebody correct me, but basically they had filled out the check completely, but they didn't put maybe like the name of the church. They left that part blank.
There's nothing wrong if you just want to write the name of the church in there. If that's the only thing they've left off. One time I got a check that was signed and completely blank. And so I went back, the member actually sat on the back of the church row on the pew, and I went back out there and handed it to him and said, "How much can I fill this out for?" And she laughed and promptly took it back and filled it out. But if it's just the name, just fill it in. If it's other stuff missing, the amount or the way it was written out, the dollar amount, you might want to go back to the person that put the money in the plate.
Okay. And actually the other one got answered already. I forgot that I made that note, so we're good on that. Looks like we're no more questions. So we'll, as we're sort of doing the ending here, if anybody has one, feel free to go ahead and put it. And also you can always feel free to keep adding comments down the road. We've had that happen with some of the other videos that someone has gotten to with an answer as we've been able to. But I definitely want to thank Brother Porter for his time tonight and all the information. There's a lot of good stuff here that is useful. Some is more applicable than others if you're a smaller church or a bigger church and everything else, but we all need to, I want to echo one of the things that he said there towards the end as far as we want to make sure that we're doing everything right so that we don't open ourselves up to any government issues, which we're liable to face more persecution as the years go on. So it's better to be safe on those things. I want to thank him for his time tonight and all the information. As always, we'll get the video edited down just a little bit to take out the 15 minutes where we were streaming live there, and then it'll be welcome to share. The video will also be on YouTube. We'll have a link for that. And then also we will have a link to the PowerPoint. Brother Porter graciously has agreed to allow that to be shared online as well. That way, if you want to just look at that yourself, you can pull that or download that as well. So we'll have that on the video also. I want to thank everybody for the time and those that have joined. And feel free to share as always to get the information out there for those that may need it. Next week, we will have our last presenter of this series, which will be Brother Chris Harper from Faith Missionary Baptist Church down in Franklin, Indiana. And he will be presenting about the church clerk position. Excited to hear that as well. All right. Brother Porter, thank you for your time this evening. And God bless everybody else that joined in, and pray that we all have good services on Sunday too.
Thank you.